Hello, everyone. Could we all be seated? Okay, great. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening. All of you joining us here in person, also from all around the world. My name is Zainab Usman. I am the founding director of the Africa program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. It is my honor to welcome our distinguished speakers and our esteemed guests, all protocols observed. Our discussion today is on the intricate dynamics of South Africa's relations with the United States and indeed with the rest of the world. The United States and South Africa share a deep relationship, one that is rooted in democratic values, trade, and shared interests. As the United States' largest trade partner on the African continent, there are vital economic factors at play when thinking about the relationship between the two countries. The United States is an eager customer for agricultural products and minerals, including gold, diamonds, platinum group of metals, that are vital to clean energy technology hardware manufacturing, as well as automobiles assembled, made in South Africa. South Africa has been a prominent beneficiary of the African Growth and Opportunity Act since the year 2000. In addition to strong economic ties, South Africa and the United States share a complex history, one characterized by periods of partnership and alliance, as well as tensions in some respects. It's a history noted for its often contentious debates on the best path forward. In the twilight of the apartheid regime, the discourse was made clear by US Senator Richard Lugar, who said, "The United States is against tyranny, and tyranny is in South Africa." Since its transition to popular democracy, South Africa has worked to chart its own course, both domestically and within the international community. In these endeavors, South African values and goals have frequently been in line with those of the United States. Together, the two countries have been active partners in the fight against the HIV/AIDS pandemic, the global threat of terrorism, and climate change. However, the contemporary posture of South Africa's international relations holds multipolarity in much higher regard than in the past, with global governance reforms being pushed in multilateral fora like the G20, the United Nations, and the Bretton Woods organizations. As Africa's most industrialized nation, and indeed a pivotal player on the continent, South Africa holds a unique position in global politics and economics. For 14 years, it was the sole African country to be a member of the BRICS group of emerging economies, leading 4 of the organization's annual summits, as well as formally announcing the invitation of countries like Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE to the bloc. Beyond BRICS, South Africa also successfully campaigned for the inclusion of the African Union into the G20, a proof of the clout that contemporary South Africa is able to deploy. However, South Africa's decision to chart its own course has also flared diplomatic relations with the United States around the wars in Ukraine and in Gaza. The full impacts of these decisions continue to unveil themselves, but at present, they have triggered denouncement from senior US lawmakers with implications for South Africa's AGOA eligibility. In a more multipolar world, South Africa is navigating through shifting global dynamics while maintaining its sovereignty and advancing its national interests. We therefore find ourselves at a pivotal juncture in history where the spotlight shines brightly on South Africa's role in international affairs, and thus the timeliness of today's discussion cannot be overemphasized. We find ourselves, the Carnegie Africa program, therefore, is very proud, very excited, and very thrilled to provide this platform to delve into the factors shaping South Africa's relations with the world and to explore the continuities and changes in the US-South Africa relationship. Since the Africa program's inception in early 2021, this is 3+ years now, we have provided timely analysis and policy insights for both US and African policymakers on topics around digital technologies, climate and energy policy, and the trade relationship between the United States and African countries. In fact, just last month in February, we were in South Africa, in Cape Town, where we hosted a workshop at the mine in Indaba on how African countries can maximize the benefits of their strategic minerals for a low-carbon future. Today, we are examining South Africa in a more holistic manner, taking into account historical contexts, geopolitical realities, and economic aspirations to better understand the vision that South Africa has for its foreign relationships. Our guest is the Honorable Minister of the Republic of South Africa, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Naledi Pandor. But before we introduce her, I'm going to call upon our Senior Vice President here at Carnegie, Senior Vice President for Policy Research, Dr. Dan Baer, who is going to moderate the discussion, and he will introduce Dr. Pandor. A round of applause for Dr. Baer.
Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, Dr. Usman, and thank you for your leadership of the Africa program here at Carnegie. Let me be the second to welcome everyone to Carnegie, including all of those who are joining us online. I know we have a large audience today because people are very excited to hear from our special guest. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Naledi Pandor, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of the Republic of South Africa. She has been in Parliament since 1994 in South Africa, and she previously served as the Deputy Chief Whip of the African National Congress in the National Assembly, the Deputy Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, and the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces. If you say that all 7 times fast, you'll be ready to do any speaking engagement around the world. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the stage, so please come up and we'll start our conversation. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, you're here in Washington at an interesting time for both of our countries, and I thought I would start with the US-South Africa relationship and with a short question, or a question that invites a short answer, but I know that ministers often have longer answers than intended. But if you had to rate the quality of the United States-South Africa relationship on a scale of 0 to 10 right now, where would you rate it? And the second part of that is, what do you think the potential is in the next 5 years?
I'd rate it above 6 with the executive and below 6 with the legislators. And I think the executive has a closer understanding of South Africa. And I'm not sure that the legislators have a similar understanding.
What do you think members of Congress miss right now about the relationship?
Well, I think they make conclusions about South Africa's international relations without necessarily speaking to us. And this is very troubling. Because if I were to make a definitive statement about a country and its policy, I would at least speak to its policymakers first and attempt to understand what the cause, if any, of an emerging dissonance might be. And once I have that understanding, I then would either say my perception is confirmed or is actually challenged by the reality I've come to understand. So I would approach things rather differently. Also, I think it's important, I don't want to confirm your notion that politicians talk for too long. So I'm a bit, I'm sort of on the back foot on this one. But I do think that one of the things that I certainly, as a young activist, learned from the United States of America is a belief in freedom and democracy. And that means we may have different ideas. It doesn't mean we agree on everything. And so to seek to punish South Africa because there's a disagreement on particular policy areas is the most unfortunate response.
I want to push a little further there because I think there's some interesting context underlying that. Do you personally see the bilateral relationship between the United States and South Africa as remaining one that is founded on shared values?
I think it has to be. I believe South Africa is a very important partner. There are a range of shared values and principles. And I think it is perhaps in the interpretation as to how these are exercised where we might differ. South Africa is, I think, the most robust democracy on the African continent, and this is proven by six successful elections, and I have no doubt the seventh will be free and fair as well. Also by very robust institutions of democracy that are independent from the executive and operate very independently. So those would be aspects of shared value. We have very wide rights of expression in our country, affirmed by our Bill of Rights in our Constitution. We have huge respect for freedom of religion and culture and language, again derived from our particular history, our context, but mirroring in a very important fashion what exists in the United States of America. So on the basis of those values and principles, I believe there is a lot shared.
I know that as part of this trip, you're going to be outside of Washington, elsewhere in America, and that you intend to meet with civil society. Mm-hmm. And when I was a diplomat for the U.S., I met with civil society at every stop, but it is not as common when we have visitors to the United States for them to make the time to meet with civil society. What do you hope to learn from that engagement?
Well, I wish to understand the thinking of civil society organizations and also get a measure of the degree to which they continue to be aligned with the values that drove many organizations to support South Africa's struggle against apartheid. To have an appreciation as to whether those values still hold or whether they're so fundamentally altered that we're dealing with a totally different America.
I suspect that one of the things that you will discuss both with the members of Congress that you meet with, the executive branch, as well as the civil society actors, is the upcoming election in the United States this year, and you will be gathering different perspectives on that. But obviously South Africa also has upcoming elections. And I wonder if you could say a bit about how you're thinking about how you calibrate your engagement with respect to U.S. elections, and also whether you think that the elections in South Africa might have noticeable political change. Obviously, unemployment is very high, particularly among young people. There's a wealth gap, as in this country, that is persistent and problematic. And is the ANC headed for a result that might be shocking? Not that it will lose power, but that it might, for instance, poll under 50% for the first time.
Well, I think I'll probably avoid discussing the American election while I'm here, and I'll continue to watch CNN, Fox, etc., to get a measure of what's really happening here.
Some people might tell you you should watch something else.
I hope that the outcome will lead to the establishment of an executive that would have a continued interest in the African continent and its development aspirations, and that would see the United States of America as an important partner for the African continent. So that's what I would hope for. And, we'll see where the Americans place their crosses. With respect to South Africa, I'm an activist. And as a campaigner, I campaign for a majority for the African National Congress. I don't think we are used to coalitions. We've seen them at local government level. They don't work very well. For us, I don't think we fully understand how to make them functional. There is discussion about developing a framework for managing coalitions because they've been so bad in a sort of extemporaneous setting where you've got to work it out. And so we are looking at developing a proper framework so that perhaps the largest party should initiate, as happens in Europe and elsewhere, discussions about forming a coalition, rather than it being a sort of hit and miss approach. But my intention and work is that the ANC should have a majority. And of course, in terms of our constitution, we're always required that the result must be a multi-party outcome. Mm-hmm. This is constitutional in our country.
I want to broaden the lens now. I think it's interesting that your formal title is not foreign minister, it's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. Many of us who worked in diplomacy know South Africa as a strong both player and evangelist for the multilateral system. And I wonder if you could say a bit about South Africa's priorities for reform of international institutions and fora, and what's in it for South Africa, and what's in it for the world, in your view?
Much less what's in it for South Africa, much more about Africa and the world. And really, there are three, I think, key elements. Firstly, we think the United Nations is urgently in need of reform. It was established when many African countries were still under the dominance of colonialism, and we still had apartheid in South Africa. So now that we have many more independent states, African states, that are a significant presence in the United Nations family, we believe that we've got to rethink particularly its key mechanisms and structures. We are troubled by the United Nations Security Council, whose remit is peace and security, but clearly it has failed at exercising that mandate. So we need to look at, I think, the composition, but also the functioning and the capacity associated with having a Security Council. I think we should have African presence as permanent members. It shouldn't be non-permanent in and out, because you do need to have the established experience. I also think East Asia should have a presence. I think India, being so big and not being a part of the permanent membership, is an odd reality. And having regard to the recent conflicts we've seen in the world, I do think beyond the ability of the UN for peace monitoring, we need to consider capacity for peace enforcement. We have to find a way of protecting innocent people when there's conflict in states. And we don't have it at the moment. And this just opens up a terrible license for murderous onslaught on innocent civilians. And I think the UN should play a role in protecting innocent civilians.
As you said, the challenge is both...
Of course,
sorry.
Yes, I didn't answer the rest. The other areas of reform are, of course, your Bretton Woods institutions, again, established post the Second World War, and so exercising their mandate in a manner that doesn't always have regard to development priorities of the majority of developing countries of the world. We need to look at allocations in the context of those international development finance institutions. and have a greater voice for developing countries in them. We need to change the composition of their directors and so on. So there's a great deal of work that we need to do. But for South Africa, what is key, in our view, we don't need another multilateral body. We believe the UN is the premier global body, must remain as such. What we'd want to see is its strengthening. We don't want to form some other organization.
I want to pick up on something that runs through both of those points, both the Bretton Woods institutions and the UN reform prospects. And I'm going to touch on the BRICS to do that. The BRICS recently invited 6 new members, 4 of which are authoritarian regimes. One is a democratic regime that is in the midst of an ongoing conflict. And one is a democratic country that has just elected a far-right leader. How do you square, I understand that those governments have legal personality that gives them the authority to engage in international fora. But they certainly don't have democratic legitimacy the way that your government does. And so how do we as an international community, when we think about reform of the Security Council, when we think about reforming the way that the World Bank or the IMF works, you spoke about giving a broader voice to developing countries. So many of them are currently led by non-democratic governments. Democratic legitimacy, even if they legally can represent those countries in those fora. How do we square the lack of legitimacy that those governments have at home with the argument to give them more of a voice in international affairs?
Well, the question I would pose to you is, who makes these judgments? Because I don't know, this assessment that you're making.
So you would challenge the premise that Iran, for example, is an authoritarian regime?
Well, is it your role to make that judgment?
Oh, I don't think it's me who's saying that. I think it's widely regarded by most people with legitimacy around the world.
I don't know whether they are an authoritarian regime. I do know that women.
Sorry, can you just repeat that? The Minister of Foreign Affairs, of International Cooperation, of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa does not know whether the regime in Iran is authoritarian?
Yes, no, I'm not aware of. I don't have that definition in my logbook. I do have a concern about women and their rights in Iran, and this is something that I have discussed with the government of Iran, particularly my colleague, the foreign minister. I believe what we have to do as South Africa is not close off engagement with any country, but also to use our own democratic success as an example to others, to say, this actually works. Because if we stop talking to everybody because we define them in a particular way, I think the models we have adopted would not have any meaning. So we use our own post-apartheid progress as a way of exemplifying for others that we think this is a good practice to adopt. Democracy is important. Democracy frees the people to exercise their rights and generate a wide range of ideas. Freedom of expression is extremely important, and you should have it. So we share those notions with all that we cooperate with in an effort to both inform and influence changed practices.
I think there are probably a lot of women in Iran who would agree with your effort, with the example that South Africa has set, and who are deprived the ability to access that example by the authoritarian regime that rules over them. And I think respectfully, it's difficult to make the argument that South Africa's example is available to people in China or in Iran or in Saudi Arabia in the way that it would need to be in order to inspire them to make democratic progress at home.
We're not a perfect democracy by any means. We're not a perfect society. As you mentioned earlier, we have huge examples of poverty, of inequality, and joblessness, which derive from our history and which we've not been able to fully address as an emerging democracy. But I do think that there is a strength in being able to speak to everyone. Because if you close off, I'm not sure that you achieve anything.
I certainly agree that engagement remains key and essential to finding progress. And I guess the distinction I'm trying to draw is between engaging unsavory actors and empowering them, which I think there is a difference, and one can do the former without the latter if one is careful. You mentioned reform of the international financial institutions, and one of the kind of project-based reforms, or an experiment, or an innovation, I should say, it's not really a reform of the institution, is JETPs, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships. And in this case, many around the world are hoping that South Africa can be an example of a new kind of mechanism. And I know that the implementation of the JETP for South Africa has left some people within South Africa and outside of South Africa asking questions or disappointed. And I wonder if you could give a kind of update on your sense of the progress on that. Is it an experiment that we're learning from it in real time and it's going to get better, or is it something that we need to pull back and go back to the design board?
We hope that there'll be lessons from it. We are sharing the experience with many countries on the continent that are interested in the model and that would like to reform their own energy resources. The just is very important for us. And we've already begun working with the 5 partners, of which America is one, really, I think, piloting what we mean by just energy transition, and looking at how, in implementing a move toward renewable energies, we include communities that are beneficiaries of the coal mining sector and make them a key partner in implementing a very new approach to energy resources. So training young people as technicians for solar energy plants, involving entrepreneurs in communities that have significant coal resources in the new opportunities derived from this pilot phase of the JETP. We've developed an investment plan, which we have shared with the 5 partners, and the partnership is growing. The 5 original have been joined by the Netherlands, by Denmark, and other countries. So there's huge interest in what South Africa is trying to do. We're on the march. We are retrofitting an old coal-fired power station, and that land will be utilized to establish a 500-megawatt solar plant. So that's the beginning of the experimentation. The move to a full transition will take some years, but we are committed to the JETP. And I saw on Fox News an article this morning, rather a statement this morning, why is America partnering with horrible South Africa in this energy transition, which I found a rather odd report.
It may be that Fox News is not the primary bastion of those concerned about climate change and its effects in this country. But those who are interested in climate change and its effects, which obviously are global and the solutions have to be global, I think do take a particular interest in the success of, as you know, there's a conversation that happens kind of at the stratosphere level. And at some point, we need to be able to demonstrate that we can make large political economy transitions on the ground that are going to have to be part of any energy transition.
South Africa is demonstrating that, as is Kenya, as will Uganda. These are countries that are very keen to look at what South Africa is doing. We've taken the JETP very, very seriously, to the degree that we established through the president a commission whose remit is to ensure that we execute. So it is something that we have taken on. Of course, what we hope to collaborate on further with research institutions in the United States of America is the question of what do we do with our large coal reserves? What does science say we do about them? What does innovation say? Are there industries we might develop or uses to which we might put coal that don't impinge on the commitments we made in COP26 and therefore increase our emissions? So these are deliberations that we are having with the innovation sector, with universities and companies that are already really very green and understand in quite clear terms what a green economy might look like.
I want to stay in the region, but move to coal in a later stage of development and move slightly north and talk about Zimbabwe. Obviously, Zimbabwe has been challenged by governance issues for many years. Recently, the United States ended an emergency status that Zimbabwe had that implicated a range of sanctions and replaced it with a more targeted set of sanctions that include the president and vice president, among others. South Africa has made clear that it would like to see, I think, all sanctions removed. And I wonder how you think about, obviously, a country with which South Africa has lots of ties, lots of migration. How do you think about the balance between understanding the economic consequences of sanctions, that those can affect particularly those on the border, et cetera, versus the political consequences of Zimbabwe's tragic failure to develop a sustainable governance system for the country that is not corrupt or problematic or insecure, partly because of the wealth from diamonds and other drivers?
Well, South Africa hopes more than any other country that the political conflict and division in Zimbabwe will be resolved as speedily as possible. Sanctions over many years haven't helped to do that. And this is why we've been approaching Europe, the United States of America, to really argue that the sanctions have not been of assistance. And in fact, when you impose sanctions, there are secondary effects that you have not considered when the sanctions were initially imposed. So for South Africa, the secondary effect means over 3 million Zimbabwean refugees in our country who had not been planned for at all, and whose presence results in significant tensions, particularly in poor communities in our country. So I think for us, really helping Zimbabwe to begin a process of recovery is extremely important. So we did welcome the steps taken by President Biden, and we hope that Zimbabwe will take steps to convince the rest of the world that any remaining sanctions should also be considered for removal, and that we should find different ways of incentivizing Zimbabwe to move toward full-blooded democracy and freedom.
Great. You will be, South Africa will be the president of the G20 next year. And I wonder if you could give us a sense of the early stages of planning for that process, what you hope to achieve through it, and whether you're working with the Brazilians now on a kind of shared agenda at all.
Indeed, we are working with India and Brazil, and learning from Indonesia as well. It's been very unusual that you have 4 developing countries following each other. And after South Africa, it's the United States of America. So we'll work together as well on that, I think. So we've begun planning. We've established the necessary technical committees, and we're currently studying the closeout reports of India to look at what we need to do to ensure that we really host an excellent set of ministerial working group and leadership meetings. Looking at defining a theme, we haven't done so yet, but all the necessary technical committees, including ministers, are now active.
Has South Africa, in your ministry, started to think about governance challenges with respect to artificial intelligence? This is a rising topic in the global north, as you know, and I wonder how you're thinking about fora or priorities for artificial intelligence.
Well, I've become a victim of them, actually, because recently there was a lovely meme about me no longer being interested in public service, which was totally fake news. but it had a lovely picture of me and the kind of language I normally use. So, you know, you can become subject of these things. I think that we do need a framework of regulatory provisions that would address some of the mischief that might derive from broader access to AI. But I don't think we should panic and overreact because it's part of a natural development of digital modernization. I do think we need to educate young people more about fake news, about checking, fact-checking and all of that. And really, this speaks to the nature of education we offer, because many people imbibe what they see rather than, really scrutinize it and intellectually challenge and question what they receive. I also think artificial intelligence can play a really important role in enhanced service provision in developing countries. And so there may be a number of development steps that you can pass through use of artificial intelligence, should you develop those instruments appropriately. So training and skilling, enterprise development, technology transfer, which also is a part of the climate change agenda, all of these are very important in addressing, I think, AI. And so I hope our own belief is that the regulatory aspects as universal frameworks should be developed in the context of the UN system, and then the world should draw on them as to what we have in our own jurisdictions. I don't think we should all have little bits of regulation. I just think it'll make a very confused world because AI is very much a universal resource.
Mm-hmm. I can hypothesize that when you go to the Hill and you meet with members of Congress, the main topics that you will cover are not the topics that we have discussed so far today. And so I want to give you an opportunity to comment on two things. One, on what South Africa intended to accomplish by bringing its case to the ICJ with respect to the war in Gaza, and also on how South Africa squares that with a position of abstaining on UN resolutions with respect to Russia's aggression against Ukraine. You spoke earlier compellingly of the need for the UN to be able to respond when thousands of innocent civilians are being killed. Certainly that has happened in Ukraine as well. And so how does South Africa see principled international leadership connecting those two positions?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, on Gaza and what we hope to accomplish, really the first thing is to stop the killing of innocent Palestinians. I mean, what we've seen and what each of us watches every day on TV must surely make us horrified about ourselves and our inability to stop that. So we hoped that through the ICJ, through respect for it as one of the international law institutions, that we would, through the provisional measures, have measures that would be set out and that would help to reduce the harm. We knew that we may not stop the conflict in its entirety, but if we could reduce harm to the civilian population and get humanitarian aid in, we would have been happy. Of course, the provisional measures have been entirely ignored by Israel. They've not been implemented and acted upon. We're seeing mass starvation now and famine before our very eyes. So I think we, as humanity, need to look at ourselves in horror and dismay and to be really worried that we have set an example for those very authoritarian regimes that you spoke to earlier to believe, well, there's license. I can do what I want and I will not be stopped. Because the minute you allow something like this, then what you're doing is setting in place a form of practice that will be very difficult to challenge in future. Now, we went to the ICJ because we've always been told by those who know democracy better than us that we must respect human rights, that we should respect UN institutions, that we should practice democracy, that we should end conflict in Africa. And so we were merely practicing what is preached to us every day and utilizing institutions we have been educated are there to uphold international law and democracy. And so our approach was entirely that which is the institution that has the most significant role in giving directives to nations. And the main institution is the International Court of Justice, the one with the remit to address this. Now, it has been ignored. And I hope that nobody will come back to South Africa and say, respect the ICC, respect the ICJ, respect this, because the ICJ has not been respected. And the day an African disrespects, I hope we don't go to that leader and say, listen, you're out of bounds because you're an African. We expect you to obey. Nobody else needs to, just you. Because that is what we are communicating to the world.
Obviously, the U.S. brought a case to the ICJ as well about Russia's invasion of Ukraine,
indeed.
and that was also disregarded. So the disregard is not, I would say, is not unique in this case. And one of the questions...
Absolutely isn't, and what it behoves is for us to examine how do we find a better way.
I 100% agree. I think if we give up on institutions, even when they are unable to apply force to enforce their decisions, if we give up on the normative product of those institutions, of those rulings, we find ourselves adrift in the sea. And, I think South Africa has invested a great deal in building international norms at the UN Human Rights Council and other places that obviously are violated by governments around the world on a daily basis. But the project of developing those norms, of giving civil society something to advocate on, of giving governments that are in a genuine way interested in advancing progress something to inject into their diplomacy is not a useless project, even if it is a frustrating 2 steps forward, 1 step back one.
Yeah, I think it's made more and more difficult, and made difficult by the most powerful countries in the world, because the impression that's created is it's the weak who must respect, the weak who should implement. The powerful can do what they want, and they will not be found wanting in any way. So there are lessons that all of us need to examine. And I think institutes and foundations such as this one, in doing their research work, really have to ask questions as to how do the powerful contribute to the greater good? What role is being played to really ensure that all of us hold up the highest standards? There are people who have asked me, you told Putin that you will give him immunity if it comes to BRICS. We went there to say to him, listen, our courts have ruled that we have a duty in terms of domestic law to effect an arrest. Should you come to the summit, we'll have to act in terms of that. And hence he did not attend. There was no immunity promised. But this is the story out there, because nobody can accept that an African country will act as we do. So, I have a real concern that those that have great power do not use it to effect real change in the world. And it really is on the powerful to be the biggest proponents of what is best for humanity. And I'm afraid we're missing it. And for me, it's scary because it's just going to produce more and more problems. On Russia and Ukraine, which you asked about, one of the things that we've always said from the beginning is we wish to be able to speak to both countries. And we believe that this war will only end through negotiation because there are concerns of security on both sides, right? And so we said we wish to be in a position where we can engage both. We're the only country that has gone both to Ukraine and to Russia. We're the country that remains talking every week to both to say we've got to get you in the same room. We've participated in all the working groups on the peace plan of President Zelensky. And we've now said we think there has to be a meeting with Russians, even if it's at the level of advisors, not necessarily yourselves as leaders, but we have to have a beginning. And my team is in Ukraine this week, and they will be communicating that message. Because you can't have a war such as this one, and you're only talking of the peace proposals of one side. You've got to get the two parties into a room. And so we're working hard at that. And every week we are speaking. And we wanted always to be able to be in that position. So despite the criticism and the belief that South Africa is partisan and so on, we talk to both. And in the next few months, I believe President Zelensky will be coming to South Africa because he'd like to strengthen and expand the engagement. And we always wanted to have a situation where we would be able to be a facilitator for both.
I'm going to turn over to Zainab to facilitate questions from the audience now. Just in closing, I wanted to come back to your point about the powerful needing to be contributors to international governance. Obviously, in some ways they have been, and in many ways they've been criticized, and not just the United States, but other actors in the global north, for being inconsistent in their application of the universal principles that they espouse. And I think that one of the things that's going on right now is both the need to accept some of those criticisms and for there to be different approaches in the global north, but also that there are rising actors in the global south who have been used to being off the hook of being co-collaborators in global governance. And as they rise, the duties and burdens of collaboration, of cooperation to help manage the world also require that they be open to criticism at times about the application of principles. It is part of what I think of as kind of a soft bigotry or neocolonialism for people in Washington or Brussels to wring their hands and say the global south isn't with us, as if everybody's supposed to just follow along, as if South Africa doesn't have its own interests that are governing its decisions about how it aligns on Russia-Ukraine or what it does on Israel-Gaza. We should acknowledge that South Africa is a country with its own interests and that those interests help shape its foreign policy. And it is okay both for South Africa to offer criticism of the United States when it thinks the United States is not applying its principles uniformly and fairly, and it is respectful to hold each other accountable both directions. It's okay for the United States to also raise those concerns.
No, absolutely. I would agree, and it's important that we build relationships, understanding that there will be times when we have differences of views and opinions. But I can assure you in South Africa, if we have a difference of opinion with the United States of America, we'll never go to Parliament and pass a bill that says South Africa has malign relations. We'll never do something like that. We just regard it as, I'm frankly horrified for a democracy to take such a step. And what I said was not contribution to governance, it's contribution to building good. That is, it's something idealistic and naive, as my father used to call me, because I'm a bit of an idealist. But I do believe that when you have the wherewithal of influence, of resources, if you can use that to build greater good. That's why South Africa would want and has sought to ensure that in the Central African Republic, we assist with having a free and fair election by assisting in the administration of the election, not interfering in it, but being of assistance to the Independent Electoral Commission there. That is why South Africa offered to host Ethiopia and TPLF and allow them to have talks in our setting to arrive at a peace agreement, and why even with an agreement, we still go to Tigray to look at what's happening, what's the nature of implementation, and are women who are particular victims being attended to as the agreement is implemented. So as you know, we're a small country. Our economy is smaller than the economy of California, but we contribute troops to Mozambique to fight extremists there. We're contributing troops to DRC, to Eastern DRC, again, to repel people who are carrying out horrible attacks on local community members. So we do try to be good, but we don't get it right all the time, nor would we ever, claim to.
No one does.
But nobody does, and I believe we're making an effort. And for us, the first prize would be in Africa to silence the guns, focus on development, industrialization, productive capacity, and achieving a livelihood for the majority of Africans that places us in a different space of development. That is first prize and first concern for us.
Great. Zainab, would you like to facilitate questions from the audience? I'm sure there will be some.
Please, a round of applause for both of them. Excellent. Thank you very much, Dan. So we have about 20 minutes, and we're going to take some questions. And many thanks to Honorable Minister for being open to this kind of open dialogue. When you're asking your questions, please introduce yourself and ask a question, not a comment. Don't speak in paragraphs. Just speak very concisely. So I'll try to take maybe about 3 to 5, and then we'll see if we can take another round. So why don't we start this way? This way, this gentleman there, that one, and then Tony.
I'll hold it for you. Oh, okay. Lawrence Freeman. I've been involved in economic development in Africa for over 30 years. I'm a great fan of yours and what you've done for the continent. This bill in the Congress that you talked about to punish South Africa for its involvement with Russia, with China, is behind kicking you off AGOA. That's what they plan. Don't you think with this kind of bill and other issues that have been presented against South Africa, there is a desire of the American establishment or the geopolitical faction to punish South Africa precisely because of its leadership in the Global South and non-aligned movement?
Great. There's a gentleman over there. We'll take a few, and then she'll address them.
Thank you, Minister. Sarang Shidore, I'm Director of the Global South Program at the Quincy Institute. Wonderful to see you again. My question was about the JETP discussion that you just had. And you, I think, emphasized the J of the JETP, the just component. Now, there are some concerns that the structure of the JETP is very heavily skewed towards loans and not enough towards grants. And perhaps would love to understand your perspective, having experienced it, whether that balance should be shifted, and there's anything to share with other countries that are in the pipeline and coming up on that approach.
Tony?
Hello again, Minister Tony Carroll. I think AGOA has been a great success for South Africa, but in your earlier comments this morning, you talked about how South Africa can also make AGOA more impactful outside of its own borders by being a conduit for investment and infrastructure development in Africa. And I know this isn't a trade panel, but I found your remarks on trade quite compelling. So if you don't mind addressing what the vision of South Africa can be as an accelerant to AGOA in the future.
That gentleman over there? Yeah, okay. and then we'll take these 4.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ogaga Ujo. I'm from the World Bank. Minister, such a pleasure to meet you. Given that there are going to be under 20 elections in Africa this year, I'd just love your read on this changing relationship between the US and South Africa and what that could potentially represent for these very important.
Okay. Do you want to take those 4, and then we'll do another round?
Okay. Let me try. Firstly, the bill hasn't been tabled as yet, so it might just be an attempt to rattle us, but we're not easily rattled. And I think that what it says is it seeks to direct the executive to review the relationship with South Africa. So it's not yet at the level of what the outcome of such a review might be. And I know President Biden has confronted this with a previous resolution and a draft bill in 2021 that was directed at the whole of Africa, and that one didn't succeed in going through the House. I hope there'll be a similar fate for this draft bill as well. It might be that it's felt, as many do say, that South Africa is punching too far above its weight. But I think it's important that you have African countries that do so, Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, many, that I think have a powerful role in the development of Africa. And we need to recognize, as I should have said, Morocco, Egypt as well, which all play a critical role on the continent and really can enhance the development agenda of Africa, Agenda 2063. So it would be most unfortunate if, this kind of legislation were to be passed, because what it's going to do then, it will reduce, firstly, sovereign independence and also curtail honest reflection on policies of countries, and cause everybody to pretend to hold a view which they may not truly believe in because they're trying to pacify. And I think that would be an awful political context and international context to work in. On the JET-P, indeed, initially we were very concerned that what was being offered in that first 8.5 billion was largely a loan, some concessional, and very, very small amounts of grants. We did come to the US with our president, and he had an excellent meeting with President Biden, where I think President Biden understood the concern that was expressed, and I think there's been somewhat of a shift. But we'd like to see more attention to the grant side and also to technology transfer, which is just so important, particularly in terms of COP agreements previously. According to reports, for the first time in 2023, we may have come close to the threshold of $100 billion US dollars for climate change interventions. But it's been the first time in many, many years over many COP agreements. So we're hoping we're going to see a serious intention and practice of addressing the necessary funding, research support, and technology transfer that will see developing countries really making advances in addressing all the matters of climate change that we need to respond to. Of course, the 8.5 billion is rather a small sum for what JET-P means. It's a huge undertaking, and I think we're going to need many more billions of dollars to successfully achieve the program that we recognize has to be undertaken. On AGOA, well, there is also some sentiment that South Africa should be excluded from AGOA, and we think this would be a great pity. I don't know, in fact, how the trade would continue if you don't use the ports of South Africa, if you don't use the cargo system, if you don't use the logistics and the financial payment systems and the banking institutions. So I'm not quite sure what is meant by excluding South Africa. I also point out that of the 50 critical minerals that the United States uses in a range of manufactured products, including in the automotive sector, 15 of those minerals are from South Africa. And so I think this, for me, just indicates that the strategic relationship will continue and must continue. So I believe that we will do well. But of course, what we'd like to see is integration of the African Continental Free Trade Area in the new agreement on AGOA. I think all of us as Africans would agree on that integration, because we do believe intra-African trade must be improved. And we would like to see that through AGOA, a greater role is played in building productive capacity in Africa. Already Morocco is making significant strides in building an automotive sector. And we are discussing, South Africa and Morocco, how we collaborate on components for automotive sector and how we use South Africa's incentive program to develop similar programs in other countries on the continent. So already you're seeing that cross sharing of practices occurring across the continent. And I'm hoping that as new American business is established in different African countries, that what will happen is we'll see more manufacturing capacity, greater productive ability, plants being established in Africa rather than products manufactured here and then delivered to African shores. This is what we are really hoping for. We also have asked the legislators that we want a longer term period for the act, because it's been rather short term and it's difficult. You're never sure, is it going to end in 5 years' time? Do we have to negotiate again? What exactly will happen? So we've asked for a longer horizon for the new act, and we hope that there'll be agreement on that. On elections, gosh, from the colleague in the World Bank, I can't quite remember the question.
I was asking, given that there will be certain elections across the continent, what does this evolving relationship between the US and South Africa potentially signify or mean in terms of global actors around supporting elections?
Well, I think it means that where we can help, we should be of help. And South Africa, of course, would be of assistance through its electoral bodies, but also through the African Union and our regional body, SADC. We would assist where countries might need help in managing their elections. And of course, in Africa, we have very strong independent observation of elections. Although one of our political parties has written to Secretary Blinken asking for money for independent observers, unaware, it would appear, for honorable members, very odd, unaware that each election we have over 140 different organizations observing in South Africa, and they are all independent. But they are here, I understand, in America, asking for money from America. So I'm not quite sure what's happening. What we hope with elections this year is that they'll be free and fair in all the countries that will host elections this year, and that we will have our international community working closely with us to ensure that we have successful elections and really entrench robust democracies on the continent.
Excellent. We'll take another round. But before then, I want to say two things. The first is building on the question on AGOA, just to announce to everyone that next week, March 27th, we are hosting a very important discussion on US-Africa trade relations. It's going to highlight a book published by Professor David Luke, who has done a lot of fantastic research on AGOA, on the relationship with Europe, with China, and then the AFCFTA, and he very much uses research and evidence to highlight the points that you made, Honorable Minister, on integrating the AFCFTA into AGOA and vice versa, extending the time horizon, and a number of other things to make it more effective. So please look up our website and register if of interest. The second is actually a question of my own, and this is a bit of a wild card, but hopefully I think it's an important one. You do talk about leadership in Africa, exercise in leadership, and South Africa has demonstrated a lot of that. But there are also critical gaps with respect to having a common Africa voice on crucial issues. Yes, there's the AFCFTA, but on climate policy, on the energy transition, there's no common Africa position. The African continent will have to navigate the prospect of a low-carbon transition, a world without fossil fuels, a world in which there will be rising demand for the minerals that you mentioned, and being able to ensure that countries maximize the benefits of those minerals, they're able to add value and industrialize, all of the things that you mentioned. But African countries cannot act alone, but there's no common Africa position. And on this, personally, I put the blame on both South Africa and Nigeria. The two leaders, in a sense, in many respects. There used to be a South Africa-Nigeria binational commission.
There still is.
There still is. What is the state of that? Are there critical working groups? Can the two countries come together and provide that needed leadership on crucial issues? I think that is missing. So if you could address that, and then we'll take a few more questions.
Okay. Well, there is a binational commission between South Africa and Nigeria, and we're expecting President Tinubu to come to South Africa, we hope, before the election. He should have come in December last year, but for a range of reasons could not. And we have a number of working groups, and I think through the leadership of President Buhari, we did make a great deal of progress in reviving the BNC and getting various sectors working far more closely together. So I do see an improved range of activity. On the notion of a shared African or common position, I think Africa is 54 very different countries. And we're not homogenous in political practice or in policy thought. But we are making progress, and I think the African Union, having crafted a strategic document for Africa, Agenda 2063, has drawn us much closer together in terms of our development aspirations and the programs and priorities that we are pursuing. But we are multicultural, multilingual. We have so we are very diverse, but it doesn't detract from us working together. We do work together, and I think in a very improved fashion under the auspices of the African Union. And also, I don't wish to ever underplay the fact that one of the key interlocutors in our struggle for freedom was the Organization of African Unity. We were very fortunate as South Africa that in our fight against apartheid, our neighbors, Boleswa, around us, never betrayed, never stood with anyone else, but stood with us as the liberation movement to fight apartheid. So there is a coherence, but we may need to do more to strengthen it. And I do think maybe as little countries, sometimes we're too focused on sovereignty and inadequately focused on collaboration. And that I think we do need to strengthen, because we tend to retreat to national sovereignty when we feel we may not get the advantage that we desire. So it's something we should work on.
Okay, great. Work in progress. So we're going to go this side. We'll try to take another 5. This lady here. Sorry, you can hold it. Can I stand?
Are you holding the mic? Okay, may you please come a bit closer? Okay, hello everybody. Ndinguzianda Siyabulela Mchonji, a South African currently staying in the States. And my question is, how is the South African government leveraging South African entrepreneurs in the US and the South African diaspora in the US to strengthen our US-South Africa relationships?
Okay, the lady beside her.
Okay. Hi, I'm Loyiso Kumamchonji. I am a graduate student at George Washington University and communications and media lead for an NGO in South Africa. My question is mainly with the youth, because you did mention the shared values with the youth in both South Africa and the US. And how are there any resources and structures in place to not only strengthen that relationship, but to empower South African and American youth that are in both countries and evolving those relationships on the ground? Because beyond political structures, there is obviously the social aspect that is quite important. So just want to hear your views on that.
Okay. Oh. Okay. Okay, her, and then Ambassador.
Oh, you want to hold it? Oh, okay. Yes, Val Okaru-Bissant. I'm the CEO, General Counsel, founder of Afro-Cosmo Development Impact. I'm very pleased to meet you, Her Excellency Naledi. My question has to do with, you alluded to carbon, that you had excess coal. So I see that as a carbon source. And just to piggyback on the gentleman that asked the question about concessional loans and also the issue of grants, I'm adding on to that Article 6 of Paris Accord. To what extent South Africa, within the framework of the just transition, going to tap into the Article 6 transition provision of Paris Accord, which has to do with the debt for climate swaps, which is a big thing. Belize and a number of countries are doing that right now. And also the issue of the carbon credits, trading in carbon credits. And how do you hope to ameliorate the greenwashing, the problem of greenwashing?
Okay, thanks. Ambassador here, and then we'll go to those two gentlemen.
Okay, Ambassador, thank you, Zainab, and thank you, Minister. I'm Hilda, Ambassador of the African Union here in the US, and thank you for amplifying the issues that Africa is putting on the table and the policy frameworks that we are talking about, and the way Africa is, and that African Union is the one that has made us come together in the push of the colonialism time. Looking at AGOA and also looking at the AFCFTA. I think Zainab inclined to that a little bit, but the question that is coming up here in the US as I go into meetings is to say, how will the 55 member states of Africa work with the AFCFTA while AGOA is selective, let me put it that way, there are countries that are eligible to AGOA, and some are not on the continent. And at the same time, we're talking of intra-trade, and we want to push, we're seized with this issue as Africans at the moment. We want to integrate, we want to do business amongst ourselves. And how do we come up with a synergy between AGOA and the AFCFTA? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let's just take, I think, the Norwegian embassy. The gentleman, yes.
Thank you very much, Zainab, and thank you very much, Minister Pandor. I'm Stein Nesvåg with the Norwegian Embassy here in Washington, D.C. What are the three main messages you want to leave behind here in Washington, D.C.?
Okay, let's address these questions, and if there's time, we'll do another round, a final round. So, Honorable Minister, over to you.
All right, thank you very much. I think we don't do enough to work closely with the South African diaspora in the United States of America, but also not enough to work with African Americans. I think much more effort has to be put in. And it's one of the tasks I've just assigned the ambassador in my meeting with him yesterday, that I think much more effort has to be devoted to that particular challenge. But every South African has a duty to find out where the embassy is and to register themselves. Because you don't do it, and then when you're in trouble and there's some disaster, that's when you're all saying, I'm a South African, rescue me. but we don't know who you are, where you live, and so on. So there's also something you need to do as South Africans and Africans in the diaspora. I also think in the United States of America and in Europe, where there are many of our fellow Africans, you have an immense opportunity to really support and promote the development aspirations of our countries and our continent, and to play a role in ensuring that we do achieve the goals we've set for ourselves. Many of you are, of course, remitting important support to your families through the financial remittances that you send back home. We need to see this much more and greater focus on the development issues. On the matter of youth, clearly youth skills are an important endeavor for us, and building international cooperation in developing those skills is critical. That's why we have collaboration between universities in the United States of America, science institutes, and other bodies, and we have training of young people from both countries. We've also done a great deal in the PhD programs, where there are joint research initiatives and where we have agreement that students at University of Fore who are doing masters and PhD in agricultural sciences can come and do part of their research here, while students from here would also do part of their research in South Africa or another African country. So we've got some really exciting agreements through a range of bodies, including support from USAID in its higher education programs. And with ourselves, we have a very good cadet program for young people. We would like to see young people from elsewhere participate in those programs, but there are many initiatives for youth cooperation. Well, I really can't answer on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. I think that is the business of the Minister of Environment, and she can answer on it. But all I can confirm is that we do support, through all the COPs since Paris, that the Paris Agreement has been one of the best outcomes from the COP meetings, and it should be implemented fully. This is our view. And we are looking at the matter of carbon credits. Some of the municipalities at home have already begun to develop a practice, but we'd like to have a national practice, a national regulatory environment, and it's something that we are discussing, and I'm sure we'll move on it in the next administration. On debt swaps, also under discussion, and I just wanted to say, apropos of your comment on African unity, that the African Caucus on climate change has been a far-improved caucus compared to 5 years ago. It's a much more coordinated and coherent perspective being presented at the Conference of the Parties. In the past, you'd have dissonance between African views. It's been much better in the past few years, and we've seen a stronger and more, I think, astute caucus position. How will we work together, given AGOA and AFCFTA? I think in each, we have to draw out what are the advantages. And as we export on a preferential basis products from the 36 member states that are part of AGOA, we need to look at how other African countries could play a role, and perhaps in future examine, with future iterations, might all of us become a part. But remember that AGOA is an American act, it's not an African act, and there are conditionalities related to democratic practice, human rights values, and other issues, and so it's not designed by us. But I do think we need to look at how we could broaden benefit for many more African countries. This is an area that we would like to see more closely examined. What are the three main messages? Well, the first one is if you harm us, you harm the whole of the continent, and it's not a good idea. The second one is our intentions are honest, and positive. And the third one is we regard America as an important strategic partner for South Africa, and the best is achieved with the two working together rather than being at loggerheads.
Excellent. So I'm mindful of time. We have just a few minutes to go. We'll take a few more questions. I don't think we'll address them, but at least you have a chance to speak. So can we start in that direction? That gentleman here with the mirror, this gentleman here. She missed you. We'll come back. So please be very concise.
Thank you, Minister Pandor, and thank you, Director Zainab Usman. My question is about Haiti. So South Africa, you've spoken with a great independent voice about freedom. South Africa is a great modern case of African freedom. It shares a genealogy of freedom, with Haiti being one of the first modern cases of Black liberation that has suffered for it empirically since. Haiti's going through a tough moment right now. What role does South Africa play? What role does Africa play in supporting Haiti? And how can we think beyond guns for how to support Haiti to have the benefits of the freedom that it fought for?
Okay. This gentleman here. And then is there anyone? Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Minister. I'm Jeremy Holt with the Center for International Private Enterprise. Corruption and state capture have been identified as major issues or major impediments to trust in government and public service provision and development in South Africa. Now, the Biden administration has identified anti-corruption as one of its main international development and democracy promotion goals. Do you see any opportunity for international cooperation there, and if so, how?
So I'm afraid those are the only ones we can take. I really apologize, but we have a hard stop. The minister has to go to the Hill. So, Honorable Minister, anything else you want to say?
Yes. I think I just want to say that I think we're not doing enough on Haiti, and we need to look at what more we can do. And that's one of the reasons why I'm going to the foreign ministers' meeting of CARICOM in the next few days to try and learn whether there is a role that we could consider playing. We had very strong relations with Haiti, but there was a real interference with their democratic practice and their election of their own leader, who eventually ended up in exile in South Africa. Hope to be guided by the ministers in CARICOM. Anti-corruption, this is our big fight in South Africa, because we believe corruption is a cancer, and that if you allow it to take hold in a society, it will just destroy any opportunity for progress. And one of the reasons why I will be voting for President Ramaphosa is because he is resolute on fighting corruption, and I support that entirely.
On that note, I think this has been a very, very engaging conversation. Thank you very much, Minister Pandor, for joining us, for your very candid views, for being open to this kind of dialogue. That is certainly what we stand for here at the Carnegie Endowment. I know, the conversation went very well. There were moments when we did ask tough questions, but yes, really, that's who we are. That's what we stand for. We will give a platform, in the hope of having this kind of open conversation. But I also want to use this moment to thank a lot of people who worked behind the scenes to make this happen for months, actually. Since last year, we're working on this. The Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation, the Embassy of the Republic of South Africa here in Washington, D.C., but also the Africa program at Carnegie, thinking Blaine Solomon, Drew Danik, Saskia Holman, thank you very much. Our colleagues in communications at Carnegie, Emily, Mira, Zach, Ed, Clarissa, and others. And very importantly, thank you so much to the audience for showing up, full room as usual. But I think something very important that the minister mentioned should give us all a moment of reflection, that it's important to silence the guns in Africa, but also around the world, so that the business of development, of progress, of prosperity for everyone can march ahead. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Well
Thank you
done.
very much. Thanks.